Hello, everyone. Welcome to lesson 3 of our topic, A History of Global Politics, Creating an International Order. Learning Outcomes. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify key events in the development of international relations, differentiate internationalization from globalization, define the state and nation, distinguish between the competing conceptions of internationalism, and discuss the historical evolution of international politics. The main topics are the following: attributes of today's global system, the interstate system, internationalism, and its conclusion. The world is composed of many countries or states, all of them having different forms of government. Some scholars of politics are interested in individual states and examine the internal politics of these countries. Scholars studied bureaucracy, interaction between states, internal politics, trade deals between states, political, military, diplomatic engagement between two or more countries. Those are an example of international relations. But if we will explore the deepening of interactions between states, that is what we call internationalization. So its specifics is the major part of globalization. So in this lesson, we will prove that globalization does not only mean the economic aspect, but as well as the historical and the political side of it. And actually, there are a lot of major aspects which was discussed in the introduction of globalization. But here, we will examine the history and politics of the global arena. Although this course is contemporary world, we cannot avoid history. What international relations are today is largely defined by events that occurred as far back as 400 years ago. So don't worry, because we will eventually discuss contemporary world politics. But in order to do that, we need first to work backwards. So sit back and relax, and let's get into the time machine and let us uncover the behind the scenes of the international order that we are experiencing today. Let us first discuss the attributes of today's global system. So there are countries or states that are independent and govern themselves, just like the Philippines. These countries interact with each other through diplomacy. So just like the Philippines, we have diplomatic engagements with other states. There are also international organizations like United Nations that facilitate these interactions. And international organizations has their own functions aside from facilitating meetings, in which we will elaborate in the next few slides. United Nations has different tasks. It has also its own specific agencies. One of the examples is World Health Organization, which main goal is to maintain the health standards of all the people around the world. Another example is International Labor Organization, which secures all the employees to be treated equally by their employers. What are the origins of this system? The answer is nation-state. However, it can be used interchangeably. That is why it's very important to differentiate a nation from a state. So when we talk about state, that means it's legal or political concept. When we talk about nation, it refers to ethnic or racial concept. State means its country and its government. Well, nation means its common race, religion, language, territory, history, culture, or political aspirations. Last but not the least, when we talk about state, it has four essential elements. And for nation, the elements are not essential and ever-changing. Let us elaborate further what are the four essential elements of a state, which is not that important when we talk about nation. Four essential elements of a state: people, the inhabitants of a state; territory, the fixed portion of the earth where inhabitants live; government, the instrument used by the state where its will is formulated, expressed, and realized; sovereignty, the power of the state to command obedience. There are two types: internal sovereignty and external sovereignty. Internal sovereignty is the power of the state to regulate its domestic affairs. External sovereignty means the power of the government or the state to control or to regulate its international affairs. In other words, sovereignty means independence or freedom. So what if one of the element is missing? What if people is missing? Or government is missing? Can you still call it as a state? The answer is no. All of the four essential elements should be present so that you can call it as a state. According to Benedict Anderson, nation is like an imagined community. Members do not personally know each other, but yet they bear in their mind the thought of mutual connection. One of the example is religion. Because you can become a Catholic if you want, even though that you are not living in a Catholic country, or if you want to live, or if you want to be an Islam, even though that is not an Islamic country, then you can choose to have that religion. However, you cannot simply become a Filipino or become an American because there are certain qualifications or requirements that you need to address and comply. In order to elaborate further the definition of Benedict Anderson, let us try to check these pictures. So si Manny Pacquiao, if mo tanaw ka sa iyahang away, how will you feel sa kada sumbag niya? It is as if ikaw ang nakasumbag, right? How about this? Taga-shoot ni Jomar Fajardo. It is as if ikaw po ang nakashoot. How about this? Lea Salonga, which is sikat kaayo nga international singer. It is as if nga imuha siyang ate. Or how about this? Miss Catriona Gray, Miss Universe. It is as if BFF kaayo nimo siya. So, it involves feelings. Because according to Benedict Anderson, there is a mutual connection. So, if makita ninyo ni sila, are you proud that they are Filipinos as well? Of course, yes. So, if inyuhan na siyang ma-feel, because it involves mutual connection, then that means that you are part of one nation. However, not all states are nations, and not all nations are states. Can you guess what flag is it? How about this? Or this? So what is your answer? The answers are Wales, England, and Scotland. So for Wales, there are those people living here shares the same culture, tradition, language, as well as in England and in Scotland. But each of this cannot be called a state because they are under the sovereignty of the state called the United Kingdom. So this is an example why not all nations are called states. On the other hand, how about this map? What do you think? Unsa ni siya nga map? The answer is, yes, you're correct. It's the United States map. So each color here represents a certain state. The state of Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, Arizona. However, it cannot be called a nation of Texas, a nation of New Mexico, Kansas, California, because all of the people living in different states, in United States, shares the same language, culture, tradition, race, religion, and many others. So that is why they are part of the nation of United States. So this is an example why not all states can be called a nation. We can also give an example which is in Philippine context, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and Muslim Mindanao. So it is called a nation, but it cannot be called a state because it is under the sovereignty and power of the Republic of the Philippines. If there are communities that are not states, they often seek some form of autonomy within their mother states. One of the example is the nation of Quebec. So Quebec is under Canada, but in Quebec, they requires the people to speak French language competencies for their citizens because Quebec is a colony of France before. Nation and state are closely related because it is nationalism that facilitates state formation. So right now, it has been the nationalist movements that have allowed for the creation of nation states. So states become independent and sovereign because of nationalist sentiment that clamors for this independence. So that is why sovereignty is one of the fundamental principles of modern state politics. So we will tackle the origin of the present-day concept of sovereignty. Again, sovereignty means freedom or independence. The interstate system. It can be traced back by the 30 Years' War, which started in 1618 and ended in 1648. So it started with King Ferdinand II in 1618. So King Ferdinand II is the king of Bohemia, and he wants to impose Catholicism. However, there are some nobilities who don't want to be a Catholic. They want to be a Protestant. So si King Ferdinand II nagpadala og mga representative para mitingon ang mga gusto nga mahimong Protestant nga mga nobility. However, dili peace ang nahitabo, but there is chaos. Ang mga representative ni King Ferdinand II is ilahang gilabay sa bintana sa Prague Castle. Mura na siya kataas sa castle ni Rapunzel. So of course, ang uban nga balian, ang uban namatay. So it started the 30 Years' War. So it is a question about religion. So if you will trace the history, religion is really a sensitive issue. Because tungod ana diha nagsugod ang 30 Years' War. And literally, it is 30 years because it happened between 1618 to 1648. So in 1648, may gani is nagkasinabot na dayon sila. The Holy Roman Empire, Spain, France, Sweden, and Dutch Republic recognized the signers to exercise complete control over domestic affairs and not meddle in each other's affairs. So nagkasinabot sila nga dili na sila maglabot-labot sa uban. So kung unsa ilang rules, mao lang pud ang ilaha. If unsa ilang religion, then they are free to exercise what they want. And that treaty is called Westphalian Treaty. And it provided stability for the nations of Europe. So because of the Treaty of Westphalia, Europe was stable. So meaning wala away-away sa ilaha at peace si Europe up until the French Revolution. So French Revolution started in France. So in France, there's what we call the social class. So ang mga tao dito was divided into three estate. The first estate is the clergy, katong mga pare and all other person nga connected sa church. The second estate is the nobility, katong mga dato kayo, and then the third estate is the middle class, like doctors, lawyers, up to sa mga tao nga mga pobre kaayo, like kanang mostly workers sa field. So mga lower class ni siya ang third estate. And then sa una, America and France, kay friends kay ni sila. So one of the problem po ni France, because sa ilang friendship, is the costly involvement of France in the American Revolution. So, the United States was a colony of Britain before. So, colony di ay ni Britain si America. And then kani si France, ihang gitabangan si America to become independent ni Britain. And one of the reason as well kay si France po di ay sa una is under ni Britain. So that is why nitabang po siya ni America to declare independence from Britain. And because of that, na bankrupt si France. And then another problem is the 2 decades of poor harvest and drought. So imagine 20 years. Halos walay ulan-ulan sa France. And then because of that, taas na kaayo ang panaliton because gamay ra kayo ang ilahang ma-harvest. And then, si France food, ang mga tao sa France, the staple food there is not rice but bread. So grabe ang pag-increase sa bread. And because of that, grabe nagkalisod ang mga tao. Even ang ilahang pagkaon nagkalisod gud sila og ayo. And then because of that, the people there, or kaning mga tao nga naa sa third estate, itong mga lower class, they wanted to get rid of feudalism. Kay mostly, ang mga tao nga third estate is grabe ka mga luoy. Because they were discriminated, because they belong to the lower class. So, kani sila, need sila magbayad. So, kani si third estate, need sila magbayad og tax ni first estate of the second estate, clergy og nobility. And imagine, clergy and nobility is just 2% of the population. Well, the third estate is 98%. That is why ningon sila nga kapoy na kay manarbaho, and then ang gakadato lang is kanis nobility, and then hayahay po kaayo si clergy because unequal ang ilahang taxation. Because exempted sila sa tax. So, luoy kaayo si third estate. So, nakadecide si third estate nga muhawa sa social structure. But, dili musugot si clergy o si nobility. So, that is why nagbutang sila or nagpadala sila og representative, isa ni clergy, isa ni nobility, o isa ni lower class, kani si third estate. However, the problem for that is nag-vote sila. And then, the vote is 2:1. 2 votes which is gikan ni clergy ug nobility, nga dili sila musugot nga muhawa sa social structure si third estate. And then ang one, which is of course gikan ni third estate, one vote is yes nga musugot siya nga muhawa sila sa social structure. And then because of that vote, because of that unequal vote, nakarealize si third estate that is nonsense, because the representative or the representation of each estate is not equal, because again, clergy and nobility comprise 2% of the population, while the third estate comprise 98%. So that is why nagmusog si third is nga muhawa siya sa structure, and so that dili na pud sila ma-discriminate sa first o second estate. And because of that, dili musugot pud si clergy ug si nobility, kay if muhawa si third estate, then kinsa na lang may manarbaho para nila, kay para makwartahan sila og samot. So how survive if wala si third estate? And because of that disagreement, so the third estate declared themselves National Assembly. And then they believe that individual rights and freedom are fundamental to human nature, and government just exists in order to protect them. So they realize that they have that kind of right. Then si government kay ni-exist lang in order to protect them, to serve and protect the people, which is also one of the main duty of the government that we have right now. So nagsalimuang sila og ayo. Nag-away na ang first estate, then the second estate ug ang third estate. So ang mga tawo sa first estate o sa second estate is nangahadlok sa third estate, because again 2% lang sila sa population. And because of that, of course, what do you expect? Kinsa kaha ang nakadaog? So si third estate. And then nadakpan nila si King Louis XVI. And then he was charged of treason and was beheaded. So France was declared republic. So independent na si France, because nitakas na ang nobility og si clergy. Ang nabilin na lang is the third estate. But the problem is, different factions exist to change France. So meaning, naggrupo-grupo na hinuon ang mga tao sa third estate on how they will change France. So that is why the National Convention was created. So the National Convention was the first government of French Revolution. And then they also created the Committee of Public Safety, which is led by Maximilien Robespierre. However, imbes nga public safety ang ilahang gina-uphold, nahimo na hinuong reign of terror, because ang grupo nga giled ni Maximilien Robespierre is naka-create of what we call the rise of the Jacobins, because those people, if ever nga dili ka musugot sa ilahang gusto, then right away you will be killed. So katong mga nag-disagree sa ilahang mga gusto nga pangbuhaton, so gipangpatay. And at that time, there are over 40,000 people who died. So that is. Meanwhile, France is in war with other monarchs to prevent the spread of revolution. So kani si France, ang itong mga silingan niya is nahadlok sa ilaha, because basin matakdan ang uban nila nga mga constituents nga buhaton pod ang gibuhat sa mga third estate ni France. Because in France, again, di ba, nag-revolt sila kay para makagawas sila makagawas sila under sa first estate o sa second estate, kay para ma-independent si third estate. Ani nangahadlok ang uban nga mga silingan ni France nga basin ang ilaha pong mga tawo didto is mo pariha sa mga tawo sa France. That is why ilahang gigira si France kay para ma-prevent nila nga dili matakdan ang mga mindset sa mga tawo. And because of that war, here comes Napoleon Bonaparte. So Napoleon Bonaparte believed in spreading the principles of French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity to the rest of Europe. So dako kaayo og natabang si Napoleon Bonaparte anani nga war because he led France to fight with other monarchs to uphold the principles of French Revolution. So nagsunod-sunod na ang war which is led by Napoleon. So it was called the Napoleonic War in 1803 to 1815. And then they created the Code of Napoleon. So mura ni siya og constitution wherein the rules and regulations was written there. So in the Code of Napoleon, it encouraged freedom of religion, so you can choose any religion that you want. It promoted meritocracy in the government. And then, however, it has its negative side because a woman has no right to vote. And then there is also a great inequality between men and women. But because of French Revolution, it triggered the global decline of absolute monarchies and replacing them with republics and liberal democracies. When we talk about absolute monarchies, if unsa ang iingon nga rule ni king, then that is the rule. If ever nga dili ka mosunod ana, then maybe you will be killed or be given a consequence or a penalty. However, pag katong sige na nila og awayon or sige na nila og girahon si France kay para dili na matakdan og revolt ang mga tawo nila, nagsigi og kadaog si Napoleon Bonaparte sa war. So that is why iyahang naimpluwensyahan katong iyahang mga nadaugan nga mga war. Instead nga naay king nga mag-govern sa ilaha, it was replaced by republics and liberal democracies. When we talk about republics and liberal democracies, it is just like here in the Philippines, wherein the power lies in the voice of the people. So tanan na has the power or has the right to be heard. So, nangahawa ang mga nagrule nga mga king, mga queen, or emperor bakaha because of Napoleon Bonaparte. So Napoleon Bonaparte made a great impact in the development of liberal. Let us hear a words of wisdom from Napoleon Bonaparte. He said that the reason most people fail instead of succeed is they trade what they want most for what they want at the moment. So, people nowadays, even though nga makadaot sa ilaha ang ilahang ginabuhat karon, and they know nga walay maayo nga paignan, ilaha lang gyapon ginabuhaton basta malipay lang sila. However, there will always be a consequence for every mistake that you will do, because that might be the reason why you will not achieve what you want. However, it is not the time, or it is not too late to start a brand new life, because every day is made to start again. Just never lose hope and keep on dreaming, and I know that we can survive it all together. Even though nga lisod kaayo ang online class, but as long as you persevere, then I know that all of you can do it. So laban lang jud ta, no? Anyway, nag-values education naman ta. Let's go back to our topic. Napoleon Bonaparte has good military skills because sige ra siya og kadaog sa war. But even though that you will achieve a lot of victories, there will always be a turning point in your life because you will encounter failure. So that what happened to Napoleon, because in 1815, in the Battle of Waterloo, napildi siya. And because napildi siya, the great powers in Europe convene. So nagsigi og meeting ang mga great powers sa Europe, composed of United Kingdom or Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. So they wanted to restore the sovereignty of the states, katong mga nasakop ni Napoleon. So its main objective was to resolve disputes between European nations. Ang nagsigi sila og meeting to achieve order in the society. And then that series of meetings is what we called the Metternich system. So again, the series of meetings conducted by the major superpowers in Europe is under the system or under the Metternich system. And itong mga series of meetings is what we call the Concert of Europe. And why is it's called Concert of Europe? Concert because sige sila ganta-kanta? The answer is no. It is called concert because mag-gather sila. So if we will apply it today, so if tayo mag-concert, di ba, mag-gather man ang mga people. So that is why it is also called concert because at this time, ang mga superpowers sa Europe will gather in order to discuss something about the post-war world. Gusto sila nga wala na'y away-away nga mahitabo and to prevent another catastrophe that might happen. The concert has no written rules or permanent institutions, but at times of crisis, any member countries could propose a conference. However, the concert was further weakened by successive wars between participants. So nagsigi naman hinuon og away-away na pud og balik up until nga na serious ang ilahang away. So British Foreign Minister Lord Edward Grey tried to convene the concert to prevent hostilities, but he failed. So pag na-feel na ni British Foreign Minister Lord Edward Grey nga grabe na kay ka-serious, gusto niya nga mag-meeting na pud sila og balik kay para maistoryahan ra peacefully ang ilahang ang disagreements sa mga countries. However, wala nagpatuo ang mga countries. So that is why the Concert of Europe collapsed, and that is the start of World War I. World War I. There are actually a lot of reasons why World War I happened. But however, there is one specific event that triggered the outbreak of World War I, and it is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria by a Serbian national. So because of this, na-trigger ang mga countries and then diri nag-start or diri na-trigger nga mag-start sila og war. And then nagrupo-grupo na dayon sila. And here comes the Allied powers, Britain, France, and Russia. And then the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Ottoman Empire. And again, si Archduke Franz Ferdinand is from Austria. And then gipatay siya sa isa ka taga Serbia. And then, kani si Serbia is an ally of Russia, meaning friends na sila ni Russia. And because ilahang gipatay si Archduke Franz Ferdinand, si Austria-Hungary, nasuko ni Serbia. So, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. And because si Serbia is gi-attack ni Austria-Hungary, nasuko si Russia. And because nasuko si Russia, nilaban siya ni Serbia. Gi-attack po dayon niya si Germany o si Austria-Hungary. And because of that, nagnilabanay na dayon ang mga daghan kaayo nga countries. Inana kaawatak si World War I. However, tagalan mo na ako og summary if what happened to World War I because we will not dig deeper because dili man jud history ang ato ang subject. So, kinsa kaha ang nidaog sa war? Si Allied or si Central? So, ang nidaog kay si Allied powers. And here comes the Treaty of Versailles. So, Germany need to pay enormous war reparations and award territory to the victors. So, ang alaot kaayo ani nga time kay si Germany. Sakit kaayo sa dughan ni Germany nga mobayad siya og dako kaayo nga amount sa Allied powers. Because daghan pud ba kaayo nangamatay siyang sundalo, and then of course daghan pud kaayo ang nangaguba sa iyahang mga establishments and facilities. But wala siya mahimo because pildi siya sa war. And because of that, here comes the League of Nations. So this is an acceptance of obligation not to resort to war. So naghimo na po sila association kay para if ever nga naamanggali dili magkasinabot, then dali ra nila maistorya or in peaceful means lang ang ilahang pag-resolve. So, US President Woodrow Wilson is the most notable advocate for this. But however, imbis nga siya ang advocate, the United States did not ratify, so wala sila ni pirma sa rules and regulations, or not really rules, but just an agreement of the League of Nations. However, na at peace kadali ang mga countries. But however, in 1933, League of Nations failed because Adolf Hitler broke away from the conference. And take note, Adolf Hitler is from Germany. And again, sa World War I kay nakabayad sila og dako kaayo nga kwarta because napildi sila sa war. And in 1933, nihawa sila sa League of Nations. And because of that, the League of Nations was unable to hinder another war from breaking out. And anyway, this is Adolf Hitler. So I believe nga sikat magid kaayo ni siya no because sa iyahang kaharsh sa mga Jews before, and I know the League of Nations created specific agencies that up until now is working. That is the World Health Organization and the International Labor Organization. However, the League of Nations failed because its main objective is to prevent another war. But however, because in 1933 nihawa si Adolf Hitler, wala niya napigilan, but there was another war na nahitabo, which is World War II. So after the Great Depression, people wanted strong leaders because they have encountered a lot of crisis. So that is why nagrupo-grupo na po ang mga countries, the Axis power and the Allied powers. So Axis powers is composed of Germany and Italy, while the Allied powers is Poland, Britain, and France. So as what I've said earlier, in 1933, di ba nihawa si Adolf Hitler sa League of Nations. And si Germany, iyahang gi-invade si Poland. And it started the World War II. So kisa may naguna-una? Si Germany. Di po na ito masisi si Germany because grabe ang iyang sentiment sa World War I. Because napildi siya, and because napildi pagid siya, gipabayad pagid siya og dako kaayo nga amount sa mga nakadaog sa war. That is why kani si Germany kay gi-invade niya si Poland. And because of some reasons. And because Poland is an allied of Britain and France, so nasuko si Britain and France, and they invaded Germany. And because Germany is an ally of Italy, so of course nasuko pud si Italy. And diha na pud nagsalimuang ang mga countries. Daghan na din kaayo ang mga naapil sa war. One of the main event, Japan wanted to be an imperialist in Asia. So that is why si Japan kay niapil sa Axis powers because gusto niya sakupon ang mga countries sa Asia in 1940. And because of that, in 1941, Japan destroyed the US Navy ships in Pearl Harbor. So grabe ang kasuko ni US. So naapil na pud si United States because United States declared war on Japan. And of course, ang kalaban man ni Axis kay si Allied. So si US ni apil ni Allied powers. And daghan na gid kaayo nga countries ang naapil kay nagsanga-sanga na ang mga disagreements ug ang mga nilabanay. So kinsa na pud ang paminaw ninyo nga nidaog, si Axis or si Allied? So here is Germany. So unsa kaha ang nahitabo ni Germany during 1945? So Germany surrendered in 1945 and Germany is part of Axis powers. So kinsa ang nidaog? So ang nidaog kay si Allied powers. However, even though that Germany surrendered in 1945, naay grabe kayo nga iyahang gibuhat sa mga Jews. So, ang mga Germans, they believe na sila lang ang naay karapatan nga mabuhi. And then, they believe nga ang mga Jews is hugaw sila nga klase nga pagkatao. That is why, dapat daw, ingon ni Adolf Hitler, is ilahang hinluan ang Germany. So, ang mga tao, katong mga Jews, is ilahang gipamatay, ilahang gisulod sa concentration camp. Kanang concentration camp is gisulod sila sa isa ka kwarto, gikulong sila didto, and then gibubuan og mga asido and all nga mga chemicals nga para mamatay sila. And there are a lot of people nga nangamatay during the reign of Adolf Hitler. That is why Adolf Hitler is known to be a harsh ruler. And then because Japan invaded United States and destroyed the Pearl Harbor, so diba nag-declare og war si United States. So that's why in August 1945, United States dropped atomic bombs in the city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, nabalusan si Japan. And because of that, daghan. After World War II, nagather na pud ang mga countries to prevent another war from happening. Kaya ang war, grabe ka gasto, and grabe pud kasakit sa dughan because daghan kayo ang mga matay. So that is why United Nations was established. So United Nations has two main goals. First is to develop friendly relations among nations and to promote international peace and security. United Nations have 5 permanent members, namely China, France, Russia, UK, and United States. And we will discuss why they are called 5 permanent members, and as well as the veto power and some other privileges in the next lesson, in lesson 4, because our topic in lesson 4 is United Nations. And we are already done at tracing the history of global politics starting from French Revolution up until the creation of United Nations. So right now, we will now discuss about the different concepts or the different philosophical views of some experts in global politics, and we will apply it to the history that we have just discussed. Let's talk about internationalism. So when we talk about internationalism, so this is a heightened interaction between various sovereign states. So meaning, grabe ang interaction and engagements of states, particularly their desire for greater cooperation and unity among states and among people. So their main goal really here is cooperation. Internationalism comes in different forms as well, but the principle may be divided into two broad categories. So first is the liberal internationalism, and then the second is the socialist internationalism. So we will discuss it one by one. Let us talk first about liberal internationalism. So the first major thinker of liberal internationalism was the late 18th century German philosopher named Immanuel Kant. So Kant likened states in a global system to people living in a given territory. And then he also said that people needs government to prevent lawlessness. And without a form of world government, international system would be chaotic. So para sa iyaha, ang global system daw is mura na daw pareha sa isa ka country. Say for example here in the Philippines. So ang mga tao, ang mga Filipinos need o government kay para wala daw crimes nga mga mahitabo because i-regulate na siya ni government. So niingon siya, it is just like in global system nga ang tanan countries sa world need og isa ka world government nga mag-govern sa different countries around the world kay para na ay rules and regulations nga ibutang, and then oblige ang mga countries nga mo follow ana in order for us to prevent any war that might happen in the future and to maintain peace and order in the society. So that is the philosophy of Immanuel Kant towards the global system. And here is also Jeremy Bentham. So Jeremy Bentham is a British philosopher in the 18th century. And he is the one who coined the word international. That word governed the interstate relations. And he is also the advocate of international law. So for him, he said, global legislators should aim to propose legislation that would create the greatest happiness of all nations taken together. So, para ni Jeremy Bentham, same sila ni Immanuel Kant because gusto po siya og world government. So, ang uban daw nga ang mga countries daw, each countries will have its own representative. So, kana po daw siya nga representative is maghimo daw sila og mga rules and regulations that is for the benefit of everyone to govern the interstate relations. And it is very essential because international law today is present in our society. And international, for those who would like to have a world government, there's actually a lot of challenges that they are facing. One of it is a question, would not a world government become more supreme? Or would not its laws overwhelm the sovereignty of individual states? So it means that maybe the world government will become more and more powerful and might abuse the individual states, especially the weak states. The next is maybe it will affect the sovereignty of individual states because maybe there will be a lot of contradicting rules and regulations because we have different cultures and traditions that is essential in our everyday lives. So it is a major challenge or a major. So when we talk about liberal internationalism, so that means that this is an heightened cooperation among states. But when we talk about nationalism, of course, this is the love of your own country. And there are a lot of disagreements regarding these two concepts. Because when you talk about internationalism, mas concerned ka sa mga countries in global arena. But when you talk about nationalism, you are much more concerned than in your own country than the countries in the world. So the first thinker to reconcile nationalism with liberal internationalism was the 19th century Italian patriot Giuseppe Mazzini. And he is a major critic of Metternich system. So Metternich system, kato na siya ang system nga ang mga leaders is the absolute monarchies. And nagmeet sila in order to prevent war during the concert of Europe. Dili siya ganahan nga there will be monarchies, but he believed in a republican government and proposed a system of free nations that cooperated with each other to create an international system. So para sa iya dapat level lang. So each country is independent with each other. So equal tanan ang mga countries and then they will just cooperate in order to have an international system. So giinana niya para daw Mazzini influenced the thinking of United States President Woodrow Wilson, who became one of the 20th most prominent internationalists. So Woodrow Wilson is the advocate of the League of Nations, and he said and he believed that nationalism is a prerequisite of internationalism. So ana siya, dapat nasa kay love sa imuhang country before you will be concerned more on the other countries around the world. Because of his faith in nationalism, he forwarded the principle of self-determination. That means that a belief that the world's nation has a right to free and sovereign government. So naghope si Woodrow Wilson nga kani nga mga countries would be democratic. So kani sila dapat democratic ng ilang form of government. And then because of that, then mag-cooperate na dayon sila tanan and then to create a free system of international relations based on international law and cooperation. So because of that, iyahang na-transform ang League of Nations into a venue of conciliation and arbitration to prevent another war. So kani si League of Nations, mo na niya gihimo og mediator nga if ever man galing nga naay mga countries nga mag-disagree in some aspects, then si League of Nations ang magpatunga in order to reconcile the disagreements. However, si Woodrow Wilson is a syumero. Ana siya nga gusto siya or naghope siya nga mademocratic ang mga countries. However, you cannot force or you cannot push them to be a democratic country because there are a lot of countries having different kinds of government. So ang ending, wala lang gihapon na prevent ang hostilities, ang disagreements between country. That is why si League of Nations nag-fail. So because of the creation of the League of Nations, according to Immanuel Kant, there is a need to form common international principles. Because Kant is an internationalist, but he did not believe in nationalism. So Karl Marx is the biggest critic of Mazzini. Kaya again, si Mazzini, as nag-believe siya nga ma-reconcile si internationalism o si nationalism. But for Karl Marx, Dili man siya motuo og nationalism, but motuo lang siya og internationalism. So he said that, or he believed that any true form of internationalism should reject nationalism, which rooted people in domestic concerns instead of global ones. So ana siya, dapat dili kay may anak ka concern sa mga problema nga nahitabo sa inyong country. But you should be more concerned sa mga problema nga nahitabo around the world because it will always affect your country. So ana siya, mas importante ang international system. And then for Marx, he placed a premium on economic equality. And he did not divide the world into countries, but into classes. So instead, nga iyang ginahuna nga mga countries, iyahara noong gi-divide ang world into classes, into two, the capitalist and proletariat. So the capitalists are the owners of the means of the production. So kumao ni siya katong mga dato, katong naay mga kwarta nga ika-finance sa production. And then proletariat. So proletariat are katong mga dili tag-iya sa means of production, but they are the workers that work for the capitalist. So mao ni siya ang working class. So for Marx, na siya, dapat nga wala daw nationalism. Kaya if naay nationalism, then mabahin daw ang utok sa mga tao because magunahuna siya problema sa iyang own country. So ang iyang buhaton is magunahuna siya sa sake of the international system. Kaya if magunahuna siya sa international system, then that means nga mag-cooperate ang tanan workers, ang tanan proletariat around the world. And because of that, then mag-improve ang tanan countries. So wala daw ma-left behind. So tanan kay equal because ang mga workers man is equal as well. Because wala man sila individual interest. Ang ilahang gina-uphold kay ang international interest man. So that's why the world will become equal. So mura siya dapat. So again, internationalism has two types. First is the liberal internationalism, and then the second type is the socialist internationalism. So for socialist internationalism, so that is a union of European socialist and labor parties established in Paris in 1889. And then it is just short-lived. So dali ra kaayo ni nahuman si socialist internationalist. But they have a major achievements. So one of its major achievement is the creation of Labor Day. So sa ilaha day na nag-effort, nagsugod. And then the next is the International Women's Day. And then the third one is the 8 hours workday period. So thanks to them, grabe kaayo ang privilege nga ato ang na-experience karon. Because naatay Labor Day and then as well as the 8 hours workday period and as well as for women nga naatay International Women's Day. So nakalit ra ni og kakolapse si socialist internationalist because during World War I, ang uban nga mga kauban nila is wala na ni join sa international efforts to fight for the war. Kay mas nilaban na mahinuon sila kung asa sila dapita nga country na belong. And this is the warning of Marx. Diba ni ana si Marx nga dapat i-reject nato si nationalism. Kaya kung naatay nationalism, mas love gid nato ang atuang country, then mas i-prefer nato ang own interest sa atuang country. And that is what happened to socialist internationalists. Because mas nilaban sila sa ilahang mga countries, and then ang ending is naginunayay na hinuon sila og away. Nagpinatyanay na hinuon ang mga people nga nabil. After the collapse of the socialist internationalist, a more radical version emerged. So mas harsh ang nipuli. So it is the Russian Revolution of 1917. So gusto nila mapahawa si Tsar Nicholas II and replaced by the revolutionary government led by the Bolshevik Party and its leader, Vladimir Lenin. So, na-overthrow nila si Tsar Nicholas II and then napulihan ni Vladimir Lenin together with the Bolshevik Party. And then kato na dayang nahimo nila nga bag-o nga state under ni Vladimir Lenin was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic or the USSR. So if sa socialist internationalism is a union of workers, kaning si Bolshevik Party is more harsh because ang ilahang gigamit ani to spread their philosophy is through revolution and use methods of terror. So meaning nakig-away na nakigira na hinuon ni sila and then ilahang ginakuan nga mag-revolution across the world. Kay para makuha ang unsa ang ilahang gusto. And then today, parties like this is referred to as communist parties. And it is also present here in the Philippines. We have the Communist Parties, a party of the Philippines. So diri na nagsugod sa Russian Revolution of 19. So para ma-spread ang socialist revolution across the world, so Lenin established the Communist International, or in short, Comintern. And it served as a central body for directing communist parties all over the world. So kani sila daghan kaayo ang nga kulbaan, daghan kay nga hadlok sa Comintern kay murag patago daw ang ilahang pag-away-away. And that is true because during World War II, si Soviet Union or the USSR, katong nahimo nila nga state sa Russia, joined the Allied powers in 1941. So, kay namatay naman si Lenin in 1924. So, it was succeeded by Joseph Stalin. And iyahang gidissolve si Comintern. So, nawala si Comintern. However, after World War II, Stalin re-established the Comintern. So, iyahan hinuuning gi-establish. Pero lahi na ang pangalan. And it was now called Communist Information Bureau or the Cominform. So, the Soviet Union took over the countries in Eastern Europe. Katong pagbahin-bahin nila sa Europe kay kani si Europe is na colonize man ni siya ni United States, ni Great Britain, and as well as ni Soviet Union. So, dito siya nilaban ni Eastern Europe. And then, si Cominform, it helped direct the various communist parties that had taken power in Eastern Socialist Internationalist remained primarily confined in Europe and has never been considered a major player in international relations to this very day. But however, for the post-war period, the liberal internationalism would once again be ascendant, and the best evidence of this is the rise of United Nations as the center of global governance. So in conclusion, internationalism is but one window into the broader phenomenon of globalization. And international relations are also facilitated by international organizations that promote global norms and policies. The most prominent example of this organization is, of course, the United Nations. And I will end you in this quote. Never be limited by other people's limited imagination. So work beyond your limits. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you in the next lesson. Take care and goodbye.